Welcome to the Talent Time Machine, the podcast that takes you on a trip to work in 2050 and asks what the future means for us right here, right now. In this episode, we'll be asking, does the job itself have a future? I'm your host, Marissa, and today I'm delighted to be joined by Kate Bravery. Kate is a corporate psychologist, author, and the advisory, knowledge, and insights global leader at Mercer, a global consulting firm advising companies as they look to reshape what work, retirement, and investment looks like for their future. We've left the idea of a job for life behind us long ago. By 2050, will the job itself have followed? We're going to explore the future of the job and its changing role in our lives as individuals, employers, and societies. Will we still be defined by the roles we occupy in an organizational structure? Or will skills, rather than job titles and experience, become the new currency of work? So fasten your seatbelts and let's travel to 2050 and beyond with the Talent Time Machine. Kate, welcome. Pleasure to have you on. Thank you for joining.
Great to be here.
So, Kate, it is the year 2050. Do I still have a job, or am I contributing my skills to a wide range of different employers, different skills? What's happening?
Well, I hope that the answer actually sits with you and your preferences by 2050. As a psychologist, I trust that we'll have gotten a whole lot better at matching not just the work to the person's skills and aspirations, but also the style of work to what gets the best out of you so that you're thriving, not just in the workplace, but also thriving in your life more generally. Let me maybe paint a vision of the future and then we can debate it. If I catapult myself into 2050, I can imagine being woken up by my smartphone, my smart pillow, maybe my smart pajamas by then, telling me that I've been matched to this brand new exciting job, and it won't be based on the skills that I have today, but it might be based on kind of what destination jobs I want to be doing in the future. And maybe my own aspirations about how much I want to work and also how much I want to be paid for that work. I also hope that the job that they might be presenting to me isn't just one that gets me on my career journey, but maybe one which appeals to Gen Zs and Gen Ys a bit more. Maybe 20% of the role has tasks that are associated with jobs for good, contributing to CSR or ESG. We see that coming through from Gen Zs and Gen Y preferences. And then maybe before the robot has helped me brush my teeth, an interview has already been set up. And when I get to that interview, it's wonderful that I have to do no psychometrics because they've scraped my digital footprint and already have a view of what I like and how I'm going to work. I might find out that the job is actually already in my current firm. and maybe the recruiter will say, hey, because generative AI has transformed the world of work so much, you can be paid what you currently be paid, but only work a three-day week. Wouldn't it be wonderful if 3 days were the norm by then?
Got it. So in your mind, you're receiving and passively accepting. And how do you get to that point then? So it's just about what you're doing online, your digital footprint, and then the work comes to you. Everyone is so well known because of how you exist in the world. And then the work sort of flows in and out.
Well, absolutely. Marissa, you have a depth of understanding around the talent acquisition space. And I think we've got really good at looking at passive candidates and matching them to future opportunities. We haven't really applied that logic in-house. And I think that's really where the opportunity is, as companies have invested in talent intelligence platforms and talent marketplaces that have that science behind them. So yeah, my vision of the future has a real, data-led approach to matching those individuals to work, a real openness to putting non-traditional talent into roles that is based on skills they want to develop rather than skills they have today. And yes, it also has a vision of returning some of these productivity gains that we're seeing to workers. I do believe that the employer as we know them will go along with the job as we know it, and we will be saying hello to contributors, because I think that dynamic between the employer and the employee has changed rapidly since the pandemic. And so I think there will be people who want to contribute to multiple jobs and have side gigs and maybe have more time for leisure or gearing up for retirement. And there's some leading companies I think are doing that. I mean, probably the poster child for this is the UX program at Unilever, where people have a minimum fixed wage, but also benefits and protection, whilst they can actually work for competitors.
I think this idea that you exist for your employers is gone. You aren't who you work for anymore. I mean, I think it's already here in a way that we're just not facing into. I think the interesting thing is I've watched my 20-year-old engage in the workforce, and he's saying things now. I can't believe you work all the time. I don't want your life. I probably want your salary, but I don't want to do the things that you did to get where you're going. So how can I think about this differently? I wonder how that changes. He has he's no house right now. He has no major payments. He has, he's not really thinking about a retirement fund. He has no children to support. Are you seeing that sentiment changes over time with the work that you're doing? Like, is the psychology of openness to working changing, or do you think in the future age will have no bearing on how open we are to doing that?
On the one hand, everybody's perspectives about how much time they want to spend at work and what they give to work has changed post the pandemic. We had this wonderful period of introspection. And so I think that sort of lifestyle contract that people are now looking for really has peaked. If we start to look with that younger generation, we also see some trends. So one, they also want to work for a company that they respect because they share some values with them. We did some research recently that showed they're more likely to be engaged if there's an opportunity to work on CSR and environment and some of the things that they feel maybe our generation has failed at. So I think that might be part of the equation. And that might not be within their work environment. I don't know if you've been catching the press the last couple of weeks. There's been a big trend on a lot of the engagement data showing that these younger generations are just not as ambitious. And I actually say our data shows that maybe that's not the whole truth. They're not ambitious in the ways that Generation X was. And that world doesn't exist. There isn't those big hierarchical organizations. And success isn't about getting to that next run. I think success in the future of work will be more about skills. And that skills will be the true currency of work, which enables you to move up and change. And I think they're ambitious just in different ways, and they want to contribute in more creative ways. But I think the one downside we're beginning to see about these agile ways of working and how we grapple with this amplified intelligence is that sense of belonging. As we unanchor people from jobs and departments, we're already beginning to see that actually psychologically, people aren't thriving as much as they would like to be. I'm curious, are you hearing about that trend as well?
We definitely are. And we're seeing an uptick in the request for employee value proposition. And I think that's a proxy for people wanting to belong to an organization or a culture or a society that doesn't define them like it used to, but it is certainly something that they want to anchor to emotionally. So we're talking about employee value proposition. It's not how many hours am I going to work, and certainly some tactical things. It's really about the purpose of the company. It's about who works there, what affinity groups, how open are they to different things, how do they identify. It's this very interesting crossover that we haven't seen before of social stance as it relates to corporate culture. In the socially charged space, we've been really interested to see how different companies have come out of that as they try to create a sense of belonging. So something like a Patagonia that says, I'm so for the preservation of of nature, of outdoors, that I'm actually taking a stance and making it part of my value prop. We're seeing that community, that sense of purpose and identity needing to be very forefront of companies as kind of a prerequisite, a pre-interview to the interview. I'm not going to engage with a company that I don't know where they stand on different items. I don't know if, how they treat their employees, what they're about, who works there. Just because they don't get a whole life career out of it doesn't mean they don't need to know what that company's about to engage with it.
Yeah, so I was going to talk a little bit about communities of interest. I think we're seeing many organizations pivot their structures around their communities of interest. And then as they evolve, using them to then inform their talent processes. In the beginning, we used to have job design and job architectures driven by HR. And now what we're seeing is communities of interest spring up. And as they spring up, actually influencing what skills the company needs to get a read on and what skills they might need for the future, and actually creating more connected careers that are based on that. Because I think people's sense of belonging will come from their professional domain, and they will also come from the communities that they choose to join. And I think those communities won't be static within organizations. In the future of work, we're going to see people more fluidly moving between customers, suppliers, maybe people in a talent consortium so that they can build the skills that they need and have those more experience-based careers. But just going back to what you were saying there about that sense of belonging, I agree a lot of it is today anchored on the job. And if we can change that, maybe we won't have so many people hitting 40s and 50s having that midlife crisis. Who am I? What do I stand for? So I think there's a real societal need to maybe unhook such a sense of being from the job we do and the organization we work for the different ways in which we contribute to the world of work and to our societies. And I think that's a really worthwhile pivot for us to be pursuing.
I just want to pick up on what you said in terms of productivity and the last generation not being as productive, and kind of goes to that sense of purpose. I think we've used productivity as willing to do the grind, willing to do the jobs that nobody wants to do to get ahead in an organization. And that's sort of been the proxy for how motivated are people, or how much are you willing to put aside what you want to do for what you have to do. And I think that the 2050 generation rejects that. They're saying, why would I do that? Especially because generative AI is going to do so much of that grunt work, filing, collating, making sure that cross-checking references are correct. That work goes away. And so the work that is left is really work that hopefully people want to engage with and people want to actually do.
I think the Citibank last year said they had difficulty hiring people in New York, analysts, New York and London. And what they did is they made a hub in Marbella in Spain, and they had more applicants than they would need for the job. But when they asked them what the reason was, it wasn't to work in the sun, which we of course all love. It was actually because they guaranteed them an 8-hour week. And they said, even in peak workloads, you won't have to work on the weekend. And I think that's the crux of what you're talking about. They have seen us literally work ourselves to the bone, and they're not up for that. They just don't see the value in it. They also don't believe that that's what gets the best out of them in the workplace. So you mentioned before how we need to evolve our employee value proposition. And I think that old engagement contract, which was very much anchored on engagement, productivity, doing a time, has evolved. Now it's a lifestyle contract. And I think those companies that can deliver on a lifestyle contract are absolutely going to win out.
That's a really different management style and really different skill set and really different ethos for the leadership in an organization. So if there's no more job, it's more of a lifestyle contract to exchange services in a marketplace. Who's leading that then? Who's even saying, this is what I need? Who's driving the car if there's, if it's I guess it's an automated driver?
Well, one thing I would say, I don't think all jobs are going to become fully agile. My colleague, Ravinder Sutherson, and his co-writer, John Brodero, wrote a good book on work without jobs. And in that, they talk about, yes, we do need a kind of a new work operating model, but there will always be some roles that are kind of fixed, some roles that can flex. So a proportion of them can be used for like these internal gig work or other work. And then there'll be these fluid talent pools. So I think back to where we started our conversation today, hopefully your preferences will dictate kind of where you might be on that continuum. But you asked kind of who's sort of getting that right. There's a company that we spoke about in Global Talent Trends a few years ago, Novartis, and they have what they call an unbossed culture. Mm-hmm. When I was interviewing them, Tripti Jia on my podcast, she said something like, we've worked really hard to democratize learning before we democratized skills. And I thought that was quite interesting because she's saying, if you don't have a culture where your managers are saying, go take that opportunity that's going to develop you and make you more marketable in the future. I won't hoard my best talent. And if you've got an individual that feels that it's not risky to get off one career track, but maybe start at the bottom of a different career track, until you've got that climate, it's going to be really challenging, I think, to really fuel up these skills-based organizations.
It's fascinating. About 5 years ago, before the pandemic, when clients would come to us or opportunity prospects, let's talk about our approach to talent acquisition strategy. Everyone wanted to know that we had worked with someone in their competitive space, but nobody wanted us to have a competitor as a client, which is like, the ultimate paradox, right? I want you to be knowledgeable, but have no one that would create that knowledge base for you. So it was this very sort of captive idea of, if we have you partnered with us, we want to keep and hold hostage our talent. And now that's just gone away. We have other clients that are looking at how do we open a marketplace, because we know we actually can't use these skills full time. We can't even afford them full time, but we need them to know us, because there is still this thing about working for an organization where you need to know, how it works and how to get things done in that organization. I think that currency, that learning doesn't go away, but locking up skills certainly isn't there. One thing I do think we talk about a lot when we talk about this sort of democratization of skills and opening talent, when we look at gig working and flexible working, we see that sort of U-shaped curve of it's for the lowest skill work and the highest skill work have the most access to flexibility and gig working. And gig working is, it used to be synonymous with the IT developer who had these rare skill sets that could charge a premium. But we're seeing, also on the manufacturing end or the services end, that is like the new gateway to employment, where people at the low end are taking gig working because they see it as an opportunity to a full-time job. And that's creating this sort of first, second, and third class citizen at work, where we have the very flexible premium, but the lowest rung are actually missing out on some of the benefits of the old-fashioned employer. How are you thinking that's going to evolve? Is more equity, less equity by 2050?
Wow, you just brought up lots of really great points. Let me just share a few reactions to some of them. Look, I do think flexible working has definitely been the preserve of the fortunate knowledge workers. But I think the dialogue now is about how do we open that up to skilled workers? And I think you've seen the World Economic Forum Good Work Framework, and the first pillar is flexible working. The second pillar is flexible working, and it says flexible working for all. And that means, your frontline staff as well as that, and maybe even extending it even beyond that. And there's quite a few companies that are beginning to make commitments on that. But getting that right takes time. And we've got one company at the moment really struggling to get IT talent. And so they recognize that if they want to get more IT talent in their organization, they've got to get more female IT talent. And a lot of women have challenges with caregiving responsibilities, either children or older family members. And so they've said every job that we have in our firm could be a job share. And they've found that's made a big impact on sort of people coming into the workplace. The last thing you mentioned there was about, moving to these skills-based organizations is becoming a necessity. Just like it was with talent acquisition, we had to kind of open up the aperture as to who could do jobs. I think internally now, people are recognizing we've got to mine the talent that we have because the skills don't exist out there. And I think there's a few companies that are really taking that mindset. I was speaking to Infosys the other day, who were kindly sharing their skills-based practices. And they said we've got 3 time horizons in skills. And the third time horizon is like skills at the bleeding edge. And they were saying we really encourage managers only to hire at the bleeding edge, because the rest of the skills we think we can build internally. And that really changes the game, because you mentioned this is a brand new skill set for managers and they're struggling with it. And so I think some of those clear directives can really make a difference to how they begin to partner and have these discussions about new ways of working, lifestyle contracts, skills-based organizations, etc.
When I talk to my 12-year-old, he wants to be a computer engineer, so some sort of programming engineer. He really likes the back end that nobody likes in terms of the logic and the how does computer programming work. But then he also was saying, maybe I want to be a chef. So he doesn't think those things couldn't happen at the same time. And when we think about work, we think about it in this 8-hour workday. We think about it as I can have one career or one profession at a time. And I just don't think that reality in 2050, what you said, what do you do? It can't be one job, because it won't be one job, and you'll have skills. Today people do devote their time and talent to different things, but you typically go back to the default of I am what my job is versus, I am the best 8th grade lacrosse coach that has ever coached lacrosse. So, how do we think about that when you actually might have 2 or 3 traditional professions coexisting in your world today?
But I think you're right. As we start to embrace these 100-year lives that I think they said, I can't remember the figures, but 30% of the Gen Zs coming in today, I think, are heading in that direction. You're going to have multiple career arcs, and boy, isn't that exciting. So
yes.
You're right. We do have to get away from we learn and study and then we apply and then we retire. And that means I think that work needs to be redesigned, because so many people say, I don't have time to learn a new skill. Or when I did learn a new skill, it was in my personal time, or I didn't see the payoff for that. So we've got to get much better information about what to reskill, what's really going to make a difference to your career.
Well, definitely back to your skill shortage. We know that the only country that's replacing the workforce that it's losing is in the developed countries or developing countries, probably India. The rest of us are facing a shortage. Europe is facing an all-out crisis. So this idea that we'll be able to do one for one or work the same way is ludicrous. So we do need to break it apart, because if we had one person to do it, we're going to have 0.7 of a person to do it in the future. So that's not going to work. So I think it's really interesting to think about what you said in terms of taking the job and deconstructing it and putting it back together. That is a rare skill set to be able to do that.
I can share that from Mercer, the biggest area that is growing from a sales perspective is our work design tool. Because I think you're right. It's pretty tough to then deconstruct these jobs with all these variables. But I think the mindset shift is not looking at the jobs you have today, but the work you need to do tomorrow. And I think when you work back from that, our work and maybe what we get paid for the work might actually change. And I think that needs to change. I love your comments there about developing countries. The World Economic Forum recently released its Future of Jobs report. And I think they said that 44% of our skills need to change in the next few years. So the next question is, well, where are the opportunities? And although sort of AI and automation is a destroyer and a builder of jobs, where they see the biggest growth is on green roles. That got me thinking, well, look, if we can work out which jobs are kind of sunset jobs, they're not going to be around in the because they've been designed differently. And where are these new opportunities that are growing? If we could more intentionally plan pathways to prosperity for people in those markets that maybe don't have as bright futures, we could actually start to level up the world and actually use these skills-based organizations to open up opportunities for people who maybe had never thought of those kind of roles. And that could deliver on that equity and inclusive piece that you were talking about earlier.
Definitely. I love that. Sunset jobs. And I'm going to just rewrite a little bit, not green jobs, but green work. So if we go from sunset jobs to green work, then I think that's a really interesting way to think about directing your future efforts for your own children or your talents at work, or if you think larger to economic policy. So let's talk a minute about this idea of predictability and this perception of predictability in the past and where it's going in the future. Every year is, as we say, less predictable than the year before it. So are we just abandoning this idea that you can go to the bank and say, here, look at my long work tenure. I'm a predictable good bet. That's how I can get a house loan. How are we thinking about people planning their future? I
haven't thought of that point before, but as you were chatting there, I was just thinking, I think I got my mortgage because I actually showed them my job and my pay slips. So I think that is one of the things to consider at a societal level. And when I look at the best skills-based organizations, I think they get that right. They have kind of a stable backbone and a spine that could be level or job-based. And then they've got the agility with these kind of skills-based mechanisms. So I think you need both. Mm-hmm. And, I do think there's a huge requirement for people to have enough information to make good decisions about their life, whether they are about wealth, when do I invest, when do I take a career break, how prepared am I for retirement, and also health as well. What preventative health care should I be doing? Mm. And these are concerns that I think matter in the workplace and matter to individuals. And I think the leading firms are actually giving people that information to say, what is your total reward statement? What is the total value of your upskilling and your learning and your pay and your benefits? We've got so much data now in the system through our organizations that nudging us to make better health and well-being choices, nudging us to make better financial choices, should be there. So I hope by 2050 that my digital co-pilot will be nudging me to make choices on that front, regardless of my sort of career trajectory. And I also hope that the intelligence that companies already have about what skills are trending up and trending down will be shared with me. I'll give you an example who does this really well. The Singapore government has a skills program, and they regularly share with the whole of Singapore what skills are on the rise and what skills, if you build them, could allow you to do multiple different jobs. And that allows young people to kind of go for gold. I want to go for skills that is going to pay me a lot of money, or play it safe. I want to build skills in areas. And they found by sharing that information more proactively, the gap between the skills people are building and the skills that will actually build wealth has closed.
That's a really interesting point about the intersection between personal desire, information, motivation, and action. And when I think about, the role that traditional jobs or organizations have played, they've been the continuity, the layer of continuity of investment, of credibility, of being able to access and bet on your own wealth. And I just wonder, when we think about just how people have opened up talent to mobility now, I think we're in early days of organizations could play the backbone, where we're seeing some organizations even saying, I'll lend you out to even competitive organizations, but stay with me for access to health benefits, stay with me for access to future opportunities. And that predictability, that sustainability, I think is what people will gravitate to get that from somewhere. You said your digital co-pilot. I think that's great. Is that digital co-pilot coming from a traditional employer? Is it coming from someplace else? Who's serving you up? Here's what you should be doing. And I give you special access to know that there's always something next, as well as being able to access that wealth when you go to do something. That role could be played by organizations. It could be played by governments. It could be played by a yet to be determined new sort of employment benefit sort of space. It's really interesting to think about, where is that going to come from in future?
I do think that we are seeing an increase in portable benefits, the benefits that people can take from job to job. But I love a vision of the future where you join a company because you want to contribute to them in ways you've never foreseen. And you weren't hired in just for a single role, but you're hired in for the opportunity. And you gravitate to them because their brand resonates with you. And you have maybe a career, not for the whole of your life, but for a chunk of your life, even if it's not a job for life. And I think that's the concept. And given the work that you do on matching people to the right employer, I think the importance of the EVP in talent acquisition and matching to brand is just going to grow in importance.
It's really interesting that you said that. The matching game is really changing from job title to job title, keyword to keyword. That was like the infancy and the most immature way of saying, like, do you look like the one that came before you, to now saying, looking at people that are most successful in the role, what experiences have they had? What proximities do they have to the, are they somebody who's been in these type of customer service roles, and therefore that body of work, that experience will be portable into the next. And that is the future, right? To say this type of person, because we are not a job, we are a person. This type of person's experience and natural wiring makes you a good fit for our type of work as a company, or our body of work in this project. And I think that's really important, because it requires a certain openness of companies to say, we don't need this job title in the past. We don't need this level of experience. We need this intersection of person, of experience and aptitude and interest. All right. So thank you for lots of good ideas. I just want to touch on a few concepts that we've talked about. One being the skills-based organization really being the organization of the future, and really the work that needs to happen for us to get there, as well as this whole shift away from job to lifestyle contract. Those are two huge changes that we see in the future. But if I could put you on the spot and ask for any parting thoughts on how you'd advise the big ideas to consider as we move to, the area of 2050?
Well, I think firstly, if we're going to have skills-based organizations, we need to fuel them with the right skills and visibility of those skills. So making sure that you really understand what skills you have in your workplace today, making sure that the skills in your contingent workforce, the skills in your permanent workforce are visible together, and also really challenging execs to say, where are we going to be in 3 or 5 years? Because if execs aren't clear, it's really tough to get that view of skills in the future. Because once we start to understand the skills we have and the skills we need, we can start to plot pathways. So I think that's really important. Secondly, we need to start to evolve our talent processes. We've had lots of conversations about how our current processes are maybe too hinged on jobs. So if we can evolve this skills knowledge with external skills intelligence, know what skills are going up and down in cost in the market, develop our thinking around pay for skills, talent marketplaces you've brought up on the call today, and ways that maybe jobs can be done differently when we think through a skills lens and when they're amplified through artificial intelligence, I think would be great. And the third one, well, it has to be human. And we've talked a lot about the mindset of managers and the skill set of managers to really unlock people's potential. And I think it does require a whole different way of leading and partnering with our workforce. If they don't want to be employees, they want to be contributors, that demands us thinking a little bit different and maybe developing more adult relationships about what's feasible today and what's feasible tomorrow. So I think it's, yes, partly having the intelligence and the insight. Yes, it's changing that work operating model so we can flex and move people more fluidly from opportunities to work. But it comes down to also not losing that human connection. Without that, I think people aren't inspired about the work that they're doing or the role they can play in the future of our organizations.
Wow. Thank you to Kate Bravery. What a great discussion with some fabulous insights that will challenge all of us whose work is the world of work itself. I'll be fascinated to see how skills replace roles and how we'll rethink even something as basic as our resumes in the future, and what it will take not to miss this opportunity for work to be more equitable and inclusive. I'll be following Kate's work and her own podcast series as well. If this episode has sparked your interest, then let's chat about it. Share your thoughts with us on social media or through our website. Don't forget to subscribe to our podcast to stay up to date with the latest episodes, and join me next time as we continue to explore the exciting possibilities of the future with the Talent Time Machine. Thank you for listening.